So we got a ton of exclusive details on how combat will work in the upcoming Ghost of Tsushima, as I'm sure that many of you have raised a ton of questions following the most recent state of play. We of course got a ton of interviews that kinda explain various mechanics and systems that make up the combat of Ghost of Tsushima, so in this video I kinda wanna explain all of this and go into a full breakdown of what we can expect from the combat when the game releases this summer. This includes of course stuff like parrying, dodging, as well as countering enemy attacks. We have talks about how stances will work and what you can expect from them, as well as skill trees and investing skills into perks to make your character even stronger. So let's jump right into it with all of the details, and as always, a thumbs up on this video would be super awesome. Anyway, I've talked about this in the previous videos, but you aren't locked in any of the playstyles when it comes to combat, and there's going to be a ton of freedom when it comes to playing as either as a ghost or as the samurai, or even a combination between these two without actually having to do any switches. So think of this kinda like how it is in Assassin's Creed. You go in an enemy faction, you can start for example taking down a bunch of enemies like in stealth mode and do it like that, but then jump in the middle of combat and exit the stealth and just attack them normally. And this is going to be totally the case with Ghost of Tsushima as well, as we do have some explanations going on over here from one of the developers, and even in the Ghost demo that we showed in the state of play, if in the middle of the combat you wanted to stop and just jump down and fight with the stances like a samurai, parrying and dodging, you could totally do that. But the opposite is just as true as well, and you can definitely challenge an enemy to a standoff for example, kill them and then grapple back into the shadows to continue playing as the ghost and go in and use stealth to take down the rest of the enemies. That's totally possible as well. There's also some abilities and perks that you can use in order to invest into your character that lean more towards samurai. There's others that might push you towards the ghost for example, but in general, according to the interviews right here, you have all of those abilities at your disposal at all times. And I think what this means in this case is that even though you're going to have all of these abilities and you can use them at any given time, there are some perks you can invest in your character to actually make those stronger if that's what you want to invest your points into. We do have some more discussion about investing skills and skill trees in general. We have another interview right here with Nate Fox, the creative director over at Sucker Punch, and one of the questions was, I know that techniques were mentioned in the state of play towards the end, but how does leveling up work? Does Jin level up? Can his weapon level up? To which the response was, as Jin's level grows, he gets new skill points that he can apply towards new abilities in a pretty classic skill tree structure. You can improve your armor and weapons by visiting vendors, and this is something that I kinda wanna actually talk more about, though there is another example over here that we have with some skill points that you can invest into. So I'm going to go over this question first and then cover the rest. But does taking on the game as a ghost or samurai change anything in a narrative sense or the world around you, or is it just a playstyle choice? To which the response was, it's absolutely a playstyle choice. I personally like to shoot villains at a distance with archery, and I invest a lot of my technique points into growing my archery abilities because that's just how I like to fight. But as far as how the story reacts to the choices you make, I'd rather not tell you because I don't want to ruin the surprise. So I think that this means a few of things. First of all, yes, this confirms that there is going to be at least one skill tree into the game that is going to have a ton of perks that we can invest points into. So for example, we were talking about that triple assassination in one of the previous videos. I totally expect that to be a skill of its own that we need to invest points into if we want to play as like a proper ghost. But this also extends to other abilities and other weapons as well, like we just saw him mentioning that archery has its own abilities and skills that we can invest points into, and the fact that he just confirmed that we can play as ranged characters is actually really exciting because this means we can play in more than one or a few ways when it comes to combat. Anyway, when it comes to actually doing the combat, yes, Jin is going to have access both to a dodge as well as a parry mechanic, but also a counter attack, so to speak. So he can dodge and parry attacks, and with specific timing, those can end up becoming instant kills, almost like a counter, which is likely what we've seen in the state of play. If you have the patience and the skill to read what the enemy is about to do and time it right, you can unleash a really devastating counterattack that, as we've seen in the trailers, can one-shot enemies. But that isn't the only way you can play as a samurai, that's not the only way. You can also force the attack, for example. You can go after the enemies yourself yourself and not have to wait for them to counterattack them. It's just that you also have the possibility of that high skill based combat that will let you do this kind of thing, but you can also go in and just like smash your buttons and like just hack and slash enemies left and right, of course assuming that they also don't parry you. There's also a system of combat stances which allows you to exploit weaknesses on certain enemy types. One stance might work great against ranged foes, while another allows you to take down those with shields. So this basically confirms a couple of things. On one side, it confirms that there's going to be stances for probably all of the enemy types in the game, including the ones that are ranged. On the other side, it also concludes the fact that their respective icons that we see in the UI menu are going to be clues to what their use is going to be for, which is also going to mean that you're going to have an easier time to adapt your stance to whatever enemy is that you're fighting. For example, we saw the water stance featuring a shield and 2 swords, and this was confirmed to be used up against enemies that also use shields as well as one-handed weapons. Likewise, the stone stance was aimed towards enemies that were exclusively using weapons, and this was indicated by those 2 cross swords as well. And finally we have the third one, which we now finally know what it is. It features a small shield with 2 spears as well as a halberd in the middle, and it's very likely that this is the type of enemy that you're going to want to use this stance up against, enemies with halberds and spears in their hand, and maybe some small shields too, but I think that this is just going to be aimed towards enemies with very long and pointy weapons. Another very interesting point that I wish I made in a previous video was the fact that apparently there is going to be duels in this game as well, not just like standoffs, and I'm pretty sure that according to some of these interviews, these are totally different things. So of course standoffs are something that you can take part in with pretty much any enemy, be it when you're playing as a ghost or as a samurai. There was even an argument being made that you can use standoffs to more easily take down enemies because you're put in that cinematic fighting style where you kinda wait for enemies to attack and do those instant parries where you also instantly kill them. So this might be a good thing to use against multiple enemies and just take down a bunch of them, even though it might be riskier than other regular types of combat. But this brings me to that duel system I was talking about, and I kinda want to talk about this from the perspective of this interview right here. I wish we showed the duels during the state of play. So according to the interview, one thing we didn't show at all during the state of play, which I wish we had, was that the game features duels against other expert swordsmen. So notice how it mentions expert swordsmen and not other soldiers or Mongols or just like anybody else. This is classic samurai stuff. Those fights are incredibly difficult and they're driven from personality and get solved in the most cinematic way possible, which is also true to fantasy. You need to study your opponent and understand how they attack in order to win. Now correct me if I'm wrong, but this doesn't really sound like a regular standoff that we've seen in the state of play, and it actually sounds like something at least one step above that, especially that statement about fighting expert swordsmen. So we've actually made a point about this in a previous video where we kind of took Red Dead Redemption 2 as an example. What if there are expert swordsmen out there that you can go in and fight one-on-one via these duels, and once you kill them or defeat them in combat, they will reward you certain items. Maybe there's going to be a legendary katana or sword that you're going to be rewarded that you cannot get otherwise, or maybe a very awesome armor set that's going to provide some very unique bonuses. I think this would be a missed opportunity, and it would greatly fit a game like this since it's based so much on exploration and rewarding exploration. Again, we're gonna talk more about that in a future video where I kinda wanna go over a ton of systems and also about the loot of the game. On a final note, we have the subject of difficulty, and I've seen a ton of players being put off by the fact that it takes no more than a few shots to take down enemies and for the enemies to take you down likewise, but it's not going to be Sekiro or anything like that, so don't worry. The barrier of entry for Ghost of Tsushima is actually going to be way lower than that, as they are aiming to make the title way more accessible and not have you like quit the game in the first 15 minutes because it was too difficult. But on the other side, for those who are indeed looking for a challenge, then rest assured that there's multiple difficulty options that you can pick from, and there is going to be a very challenging hard mode or maybe even something above that that's going to keep you on the edge. Also, on the subject of instantaneous combat, even though we've seen a ton of the targets in the game being easily assassinated with like only one hit kills, this isn't going to hold true for all of the targets and enemies in the game, and not every enemy will die from one single single short sword in the back like what we saw in the state of play. In fact, just like in games like Assassin's Creed, there are certain foes that you'll only do heavy damage up against when you're trying to assassinate them, and it's very likely that with bosses, the combat and the fighting is going to go for even longer. Anyway, this is it with the news that we have for now. Of course, stay tuned for more awesome details that we have on Ghost of Tsushima, and look forward to all of the other videos that we're going to be putting up in the following days and weeks and even months and beyond that once the game comes out. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to comment, like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and peace.